Okay, hello. Welcome. We are talking about unions and gaming. Talking about leveling the playing field. So, first off, we'll just start from here. So, who's this guy? Me.
The cat.
I'm the one with the cat.
Who's the cat?
That's Zen. That's one of my lovely baby boys. I've been in the game industry for about 9 years in North Carolina. I've been everywhere from Epic to Funcom, Puny Human, and Elephant Mouse. If you have seen me, it's probably been at the Game Dev Drink Up. Sometimes Oak City Indie, but I haven't been able to go to the last few, so unfortunate. But I've done everything technical from build engineering to programming, etc. But the majority of my time is in QA. So I've seen a lot. Other than a BA in history, I have gone through the Wake Tech Community College simulation and game design program. I'm on a brief break from the industry. I plan to get back soon, but one of my passions has always been fairness. And what better expression of fairness is there than with unions? So we're gonna go over a brief overview here of what we're covering. It's gonna look like a lot, but I promise you, I've had to cut some parts out. So, what is and is not a union? Types of unions. Yes, there are different types. Why unions are good and the tools of the trade. A criminally short history of unions in the US and tech sector. That could be a whole talk in and of itself. Going into the nitty-gritty of starting a union in North Carolina, we'll briefly talk about Smithfield Foods, which is a local success story you've probably never heard of, and finally Q&A. So, who's excited? So first off, what's a union? I feel like before we start talking about unions, we need to have a conversation about what is a union? How is it defined? So that we're all on the same page. A union isn't just a bunch of lazy people come together to try to squeeze every penny out of the company. That's the CEO's job. A union is a group of employees that come together to advance the common interest among them. And it sounds simple, right? But where things get interesting and where a lot of friction happens is where unions and the employees' interest butt heads between the employer's interest. The employer wants to make money. So do the employees. But the employer has the company on its side. So the employees must band together to essentially show that they are the company. So before we get too deep into that, let's talk about some common myths about unions. So on the left here, we're gonna have the myths, and on the right, we're gonna have facts. Myth number 1, unions are just for losers and lazy people who don't wanna work. Fact, everyone wants to work in an equitable environment. To put it another way, everyone wants to work, no one wants to be exploited. Myth number 2, unions only protect the bad apples. Fact, unions protect everyone, which does include underperformers, but that does beg the question. If someone's underperforming, do they not have the same rights and protections as you? Are they not entitled to them? Something to think about. Myth number 3, union dues are expensive and take away from the paycheck to go somewhere. This nebulous union dues. Fact, union dues help cover the cost of union operations by dedicated members of the union, plus they go into a strike fund, which is basically a fancy way of saying when you go on strike, you don't get a paycheck, the union pays for you to keep striking. And let me just ask you a question. Are you willing to pay 1% of your paycheck, because that's typical union dues, 1% of your paycheck to receive a 10% gain in your pay? So overall, about 9%. To put it another way, if you're making $500,000 a year, one, I'm sorry for you, but two, that's about $500 for an extra $4,500, plus extra benefits, plus extra retirement funds, plus extra whatever. I think that sounds like a pretty sweet deal. Last myth, unions only make the most powerful even more powerful. In fact, this is actually rooted in racism and misogyny. The undertone that's usually thrown in with this is that only white, cis, hetero-presenting men are going to benefit from the union. Now, that's not to say that unions of the past haven't experienced sexism or racism. They have, and there are problems with it. But the union protects everyone equally. So in short, unions are a force for equality. So let's begin with advocacy. I'm not going to requote all this, but advocacy's theory of power is basically trying to get these one-time wins that don't really rock the boat that hard. They get policy changes or very small, minor wins. What they often do is use backroom dealings and the courts to duke out a lot of their dirty work. But there's no real alteration of power. The strategies employed is most often litigation or spending money on political campaigns, advertising, or anything that grabs your attention about the issue at hand. And this is advocacy's main thing. It is issue focus, which is why there's no people focus. Some notes about this type of modeling: advocacy is not a bad thing. We have seatbelts as a mandatory safety feature because of advocacy. But when it comes to unionizing, when it comes to organizing people, advocacy is paper thin, and it doesn't directly involve people that matter. Additionally, it can be tricky to navigate which advocacy group is best. I'm sure you've all seen hundreds, if not thousands, of advocacy groups for cancer research, for child abuse, for animal neglect. There's a plethora, and it drowns out the people involved. And when you have an advocacy group for our purposes, they are fighting usually for causes, not specifically for people. Next, we have mobilizing. Now we're actually starting to get people together for a cause. Mobilizing's theory of power is primarily elite power. These are staffers. These are activists who set low to medium goals with a lot of concessions or caveats, or one big lofty goal where if it's met just a little bit, they go, yeah, we did it. But there's no real enforcement mechanism at play to maintain or sustain that victory. It's just a win for win's sake. The strategies involved are somewhat more complex, but still are run mostly by professional staffs and volunteers. Now, they run campaigns with no real measurable goals. Nothing like how many supporters did we get this week versus last week, or what is the percentage of our overall popular opinion. No metrics. They just run campaigns for a time. Instead, they focus their campaigns on framing and messaging with key influencers that can get the message out pretty well, but don't have any deciding factor in how the campaigns run. So in that sense, they are basically a walking, talking ad. Finally, mobilization does actually focus on people. Yeah, but to a limited extent, because their focus is more on the people who already want to take up the cause and want to champion it. There's no outreach to a larger community. There's no outreach to the people that may be on the fence or people who don't want to join the cause. And because of this, mobilizing's biggest downfall is that people burn out too quickly, only to be replaced with more recruits later on. Again, some notes. Mobilizing is very good for protesting. It's a great way to get people organized out into the streets, come together, and demand sweeping action be taken. But there are two parts to this. The first, it is hard to consistently go protesting. Capitalism's made sure of that. Only so many sick days you have to call out of work, right? The second, and because of the first, is that most protests are held on weekends, meaning that they are less disruptive, meaning that they are more easily ignored and their message is defeated before it started. The second note I want to make is that mobilizing is often prone to what's called astroturfing, if you've ever heard the term. It's basically creating a false sense of a grassroots campaign for an issue that is actually being funded by companies with specific agendas. Clean coal, clean gas, they burn and they have carcinogens. There's nothing clean about them. But those are the types of astroturfing campaigns that follow. Finally, there's organizing. Organizing's theory of power is to strengthen the power of the group and diminish the power of the opposition. They prioritize using a variety of strategies for different types of campaigns, which fit into an overall larger strategy centered around the power in ordinary people. Their strategies basically involve moving large numbers of people to withhold their labor from the corporations that rely on them. Majority strikes, non-violent direct action, you get the picture. Moving a lot of people to take direct action against the people who are oppressing them. And then finally, their people focus is the people. Who would have thought? Not just the activists, though, not just the elite, but everyday, ordinary people. They do this by identifying what are known as organic leaders, or people in the community who have pull and sway within that community. These leaders can then, independent of the organization, go out and pull people who have never been involved before. And then they can identify more organic leaders, and thus the chain continues. So can you tell which one I like more yet? Some notes about this. Everyone is involved in organizing. Not just the people at the bottom, not just the people at the top, but everyone is involved and takes personal responsibility for their own involvement. And the great thing about this organizing model is that it can use the previous models that we talked about in their strategies. There is a time and a place for advocacy. There is a time and a place to mobilize, but without a focus on what actually matters and who actually matters, those other strategies for unions become these nebulous ideas instead of hard concrete rules and organizing methods. And finally, yes, this type of union is hard to create, and it's gonna be an uphill battle. But once it is created, it's a lot less susceptible to outside influence. That doesn't mean it's not immune. Plenty of unions have fallen due to outsider influence. But a strong foundation can't be easily overturned. And that's what organizing does best. Now, are unions good? Absolutely yes. So, let's go over a very brief list of benefits that the unions have brought us, which are included but not limited to child labor laws, 8-hour work week, lunch breaks. By the way, fun fact, well, not so fun fact. In most cases in North Carolina, you are actually not entitled to a lunch break. Employers give it to you, but it is a lunch privilege. We'll get into all that a little bit later. But for now, overtime pay, Occupational Safety and Health Administration, otherwise known as OSHA. Yes, they helped in the formation of OSHA because they cared about workplace safety, which helped push the government to create OSHA. Parental leave, sick leave, PTO, unemployment benefits, short-term disability, and so much more. Now, we're going to talk about the tools of the trade, so to speak. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list by any means, but these are some of the most common tools in the union's toolbox. And I've divided these tools into two sections. Hammers, which are big swinging tools that can cause a lot of disruption and agitation, which is their goal. But in and of themselves, they don't really have a focus. That's where our next tool comes in, the chisel. Chisels are the precision tools that help shape and define how a union operates and the basis of their overall goals. For hammers, we have good old reliable, the strike and majority walkout. Fun fact, strike is just a prolonged majority walkout. So if someone says, we're gonna do a majority walkout, it's usually for a day. If someone says, we're gonna do a strike, that means at least 3 or 4 days, usually when demands are met. But they are technically different. It's just a strike is a prolonged walkout. Next, we have the slowdown, doing work at a noticeably slower pace. Finally, we have drives, union drives. Once a union is actually formed, drives are there to boost up membership for non-union members. So if you have formed a union and then a bunch of people get hired, you have a drive to basically say, hey, we have a union. Would you like to join us? For chisels, we have theory of, hello notes, don't do this to me. Apologies. Yes, sorry. So for chisels, we have a power structure analysis. Quick show of hands, who's ever heard of a power structure analysis? Yeah. The power structure analysis is the basis of crafting your union's theory of power. Essentially, you take everyone who is a part of the struggle, the employees and the employers, and you map out who has pull where and what kind of pull they have. An example is, let's say you have maybe a lead, maybe a senior developer, and they aren't part of C-suite, but if they say, we're not putting that feature in, it's too costly, feature development stops on that. They have a lot of professional pull. Another example, a studio head who may not be directly involved in the project, but can get funds allocated and approved very quickly, they have a lot of financial pull. So mapping out who has pull where on what side is critical. Now, strategies. This is why context is important, because strategies are also here. Strategies are basically, you need to be able to have organized methods of engaging with different people who hopefully have been sussed out by your power structure analysis. One feeds into the other. And speaking of engagement, you should have different ways of engaging with different individuals. You want to engage with someone who is opposed to a union a lot differently than you want to engage with someone who is for a union. It's not only going to save you time and headache, but it's also going to save you from some potential dangerous situations. Now, some noteworthy tools that can be used but should be done so sparingly. Solidarity action. This is a complementary strike, or otherwise known as a sympathetic strike. Basically, if another video game union goes on strike, your video game union goes on strike. It should be within the same sector. It doesn't have to be, though. There have been solidarity actions taken with some older unions when unions in different sectors go on strike. But because of that, you also need to pick and choose your battles, because a union who is constantly going on strike starts to get eyebrows raised. And what are you actually doing here? The second, social media campaigns. It's good to raise awareness, but it may paint a pretty big target on your back by a lot of people who want to see the union fail. So use social media campaigns for updates. Don't necessarily use them for communication. You should have off-media channels dedicated to actual communication. So now, we're going to go through a criminally short history of unions in the US and tech sector. This is just going to give some background to how unions have been in the past and what we can look forward to. And I want to put in some more famous union talks like the people of Blair Mountain, but we're already cut for time. So, since America was a colony instead of a country, most of the tradesmen that came over were either juniors or journeymen, meaning there were no guilds or formal groups to represent the trade until after America's independence. But unions did start forming around the 19th century, post-First Industrial Revolution, just in time for the Civil War and for all these people to go off and fight and die. Then unions did get a great boost from FDR's New Deal. The Wagner Act, which is still around today, makes it legal for a union to organize. And post-World War II, the two largest unions around at the time and are still around now, the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organization, formed together to form the AFL-CIO. This is the granddaddy union which all other unions basically sit under. It's not the National Labor Relations Board, which is the legal body, but everyone basically looks up to the AFL-CIO for guidance. And lastly, not lastly, but membership did peak around the late 60s with roughly 35% of Americans in a union of one sort or another, and we've been going downhill ever since. So why the decline? Most old school unions were part of the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO. And that was part of the industrial sector. Steel workers, car manufacturers, the jobs that have been outsourced to other countries now. The tech sector actually did learn a lot from the industrial sector, including paying people a fair amount. Not just because their work was knowledge-based, but because a decent paycheck makes for a complacent worker. Tech sector also inherited some of the most manipulative and fine-tuned union-busting tactics that have been around for a very long time, but now in this new age can be used to devastating advantage. And we'll talk about a few of them. Also, new laws restricting what constitutes a legal union without necessarily contradicting the Wagner Act. Basically a bunch of provisions of, well, if a union does this, then the union dissolves. Or if the union does this, then they have to do this to maintain their status. Stuff like that. And finally, good old propaganda. Whether it's cartoons, TV shows, movies, music, whatever, we've probably all heard the damn unions floating about us. So, do you still want to start a union in the video game industry, North Carolina? Yeah? Yeah? Hell yeah, brother! Now, things to note before you start. The union does not start or end at the door. The union is a part of your community, and you are a part of it. It's your online friends. It's your real life friends. It's the people in this room. We're working together to improve our conditions, both on and off the clock. The company will always have more power than you, the individual. That sounds disheartening. That comes from a long ingrained belief of American exceptionalism. This idea that anyone in the world can change the world for the better, regardless of who they are. And the companies will use that against you to make you feel alone and isolated. But you're not. Now, NC is a right-to-work state and a at-will employment state. These are different. Legally speaking, and I quote, "The right to live includes the right to work. The right to work shall not be denied or abridged on account of a membership or non-membership in any labor union or organization." Put simply, you cannot have what are known as union shops, or organizations or companies that exclusively have a contract with union members. So non-union members can come in under the door and undercut these people. Now, at-will employment means a person can be fired or hired for any reason. However, if you have an employment contract, the rules for why you can be terminated and the process required to resign will likely be detailed in that contract. Meaning, if both you and your employer sign that contract, you are no longer considered at will. Now, yes?
So I'm a little confused about, so if I sign a contract with a company, I'm no longer considered at will, what am I?
You are considered a contracted employee.
Okay. How does that differentiate from the company's perspective that it's an at-will employment?
That basically means that the company cannot fire you on the basis of, we don't want you around anymore.
I see.
They need an actual reason, and those reasons are usually detailed in the process for termination.
I see. Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, this also means that the company's not your friend. They will use every dirty trick in the book to try to bust a union before it starts. And friendly reminder, you don't need to go public with a union until you're ready to officially form one. Now, there were rules in place for a while that barred what are known as ambush or quickie elections, meaning a union election that takes less than 10 days to fully go through the union election process. In 2003, however, these rules were rescinded by the National Labor Relations Board, and they are now in effect. So again, you don't have to go public until you're actually ready to form the union. So let's talk about the company's arsenal and what you're up against. The union will try, or the company will try everything, including what are known as captive audience meetings. Basically, you're required to sit in a room and listen to union busters spout a bunch of nonsense and lies about why unions are bad. Speaking of union busters, people who are paid by the company to try to stop unions from forming. If you've ever heard of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, they're famous union busters. It's also worth noting that modern union busters do exist, even in North Carolina. It's worth looking up the names of those union busters, because if you see them in company documents or company emails as, hey, we're bringing on these people, you know that union busting is about to happen and you can plan accordingly. Next, plain old propaganda and disinformation. Doesn't necessarily need to be, oh, unions are bad, but it could be, well, I joined a union once and I didn't get anything out of it, so I didn't really pay for anything. Type of propaganda. Love bombing. Now, this is technically a type of propaganda, but it deserves its own bullet because of how effective it can be. An example is I actually spoke to a guy who is one of the organizers from Raven Studios unions, the contractors from Activision Blizzard. And he recounted that when their union was demanding better pay, Activision Blizzard responded in a multitude of ways, including this and more. But he also said that they basically gave everyone a raise, and they gave all the contractors full-time employment, except the people in the Raven Studios union. They love bombed them so hard to incentivize them not to join the union. And that's how effective love bombing can actually be. Now, personal improvement plans with unreasonable turnaround. Same guy. He told me that he was put on a PIP to do 3 times the work, all on time, within 2 weeks. And usually PIPs are the reason that you are terminated when you are a full-time employee. If you fail a personal improvement plan, you have failed as an employee. Now, next, we got good old intimidation, straight up firing. And you may be thinking, is that illegal? Yes, it is. If they suspect that you are part of a union, it is definitely illegal for you to be fired because you're trying to form a union. However, the company can also just make up a lot of other reasons why they should fire you, which are completely legal. And remember, they have lawyers on their side that can drag a case through the court for years, all the while you're sitting there not receiving a paycheck. So, where do we start? First, start by taking a good, long, hard look at NC laws and state or national laws about unions. Next, know your workers' rights. You have them. Your employer is mandated to tell you them if you ask for them. They will help keep you safe. And first, on the final practical steps, start by talking to your coworkers about working conditions, ideally outside of work. You don't want to have conversations about pay right next to your boss. But a list of questions that you can potentially ask and more. You're gonna have to get good at talking with people, because one-on-one conversations are the absolute core of organizing. Next, once you've gathered a list of people who you've recently spoken to, maybe a dozen or so, you can start putting them on basically a scale of hard yes, soft yes, or hard no. This is basically how likely they are to join a union. And you don't want to have a soft no and a soft yes. It's basically undecided. Basically saying, I'm not outright against the union. But any scale that works, essentially, is reasonable as long as you understand what you're looking at. And start using technologies to your advantage to start gathering this organizing committee. You want a group of core people to help you with this. Use private Slacks, private Discords, or calendars for the hell of it. We live in the modern era. Let's use our technology to make our lives easier. Finally, you want to start communicating with a larger parent union for guidance and support. Ideally, you don't want to start a union from scratch. That's a Herculean task in California, let alone North Carolina. So what you want to do instead is attach your tiny little baby union to an existing union for more firepower, for lawyers, for more experience that'll help shield you and your union from your employer's tactics. Excuse me. Now, let's talk about creating goals and an issues program. Once you have your organizing committee, once you have a core group of people that you can rely on, you want to start an issues program. This program is basically a list of grievances in the workplace, along with a lot of proposed solutions. Now, these can be and should be ranging from small things like free coffee in the break room, to medium things like a longer lunch break, to large things like better pay or company equity. The issues should be clear, concise, and direct, and the solutions should also be clear, concise, and direct. To take the example of longer lunch breaks, that's very vague. You want to identify the problem, why it's a problem, why the proposed solution is a good solution. So we have a 30-minute lunch break, and that causes us to run out, grab our food, and eat at our desks. The solution, an hour-long lunch break to safely go out, grab food, eat it, and enjoy a bit of time with coworkers. Now, after you've created your issues program, you can actually start working on the union's overall mission and its goals. Hint, hint, you can do this by using the issues program you've just created. Your goals and your mission should be aligned with your issues program. Now, the fun begins. Talking with people more. Before you can actually start a union, you need to have people agree that they are represented by a union. Hence the union authorization cards. Like I said, it basically is for employees to say, yes, I agree that the union can speak on my behalf. Now, this is a lot of text, but essentially, you'll need 30% of what is known as a potential bargaining unit for union authorization. But a bargaining unit, if you don't want to read all that, is basically just any identifiable group that can be represented by a single union, who, when they are collectively bargaining. So let's say the size of the and like I said, the size of the company doesn't matter. So if you have 3 people and 2 of them want to form a union, they can sign those cards and try to seek union authorization. So you don't have to. However, the more people that are in a union, the more leverage the union has when it comes to bargaining. Smaller unions often fail because their demands can be easily ignored. So a good rule of thumb, think of 30% of your entire workplace as 30% of the bargaining unit. May sound a little hazy math, but as long as you say, okay, do I have 30% of the workplace that I'm currently working at on my side? That's a good metric to use. Now, during this time, expect heavy resistance from employers. We already talked about their arsenal. People will pay millions of dollars not to cede an inch of power. Expect people to say no for multiple reasons, and their reasons are valid. Your job isn't to invalidate them, but just to show the cost versus the benefits of the alternative. One of my favorite quotes, the worker is responsible for their own emancipation from their employer. And that's also by Jane McGallagher from that same book. Essentially saying, you are responsible to make your working conditions better. And expect some hard no's to ruin your day. And that just means take time off where needed to keep energy high. There's a reason it's a committee, not just you. Now the scary part. You gotta ask your employer for voluntary union recognition when you believe you have 30% of your bargaining unit ready. They might say yes. They're most likely gonna say no. If they say no, we move on to the National Labor Relations Board election. Basically, this means you're getting the government involved to officially recognize you and everyone who signed a union authorization card for an official American union. If the employer fails to recognize the union on their own, you file a petition with the NLRB. And if the union wins 50% plus one vote, the employer must bargain in good faith over working conditions. Yay! You did it! Now the aftermath. What, you thought this was over? Oh no. Now here comes another fun part. Collective bargaining. This is what it's all been for. The right to bargain as a single collective unit for better pay, for better working conditions, for better benefits, for everything that is on your issues board. This all comes down to bargaining for a union contract that once signed will be administered to everyone in that union. But please read the fine print. There are common clauses like no striking clauses, minority striking clauses, or weakened striking clauses, or other limitations that employers will try to put in. This is another reason why you want to be part of a bigger union, because they have lawyers that can speak legalese and contract negotiations. And if contract negotiations fail, it's strike time, with some exceptions. I can't go over all those exceptions now. That's another talk. But just know that most unions, once formed, should be prepared to strike. Now, I know we are running out of time. I apologize for that. We're gonna get through this real quick. Now, once the union's formed, the employer still has a few aces up their sleeve. The first is an impasse. The company can basically say, well, we tried to reason in good faith, but you guys didn't like it, so no deal. The good news, the NLRB can essentially take a look and see if the true impasse was reached or not. The bad news is you're still out of work. So that's what strike funds are for. The second ace. This basically means the company, if they don't like the contract, and they won't, they'll try to terminate it within a 60-day window. Now, there are certain conditions to this. Communications through all channels need to be reached. A lot of anti-union laws. Like I said before, individual can be hired independent of a union. There's a tactic where if a union is in a shop somewhere, the union's benefits affect everyone. So just get a bunch of employees that aren't in the union and have them drain the union's funds. But is it still possible to create a union in North Carolina? Yes. Enter Smithfield Foods. Look them up. There's no news because they had to sign a gag order to reach a quote-unquote fair union election process. Finally, some tips for potential success. Tip number 1, please do not chase the hard nose too much. Your job is to move the needle on the people who want a union but are undecided. If someone's not going to be part of a union and you can feel it, don't waste time on them. Tip number 2, the tools of the union are not just for the union, but please be careful if you're not part of a union. You can take what is known as direct action, but who's to say you're not a disgruntled employee striking or slowing down or any number of valid reasons? Tip number 3, code switch if you need to. We live in the South, where people hate socialism but enjoy community-minded organizations. Leverage that type of speaking and avoid saying the big U word if you need to. Tip number 4, this is just general life advice, but you're gonna have a long road ahead of you. If you can't find time to rest, your body will designate a time for you. That means maybe when you're driving home.
Yeah.
That may be when you're trying to hand out agitation pamphlets. That may mean at the bargaining table. This is going to be a long, long road. So please, find some time to rest. The work's always going to be there, but it needs you as well to actually mean something. Now, questions? Thank you.
So
Yeah.
I was not at GDC, but I heard at GDC there was some big union, game workers union announced that I think, I'm not positive on this, was more intended for kind of like a screenwriters guild or something where it was not people that work at Activision or people that work at wherever, but more for the industry as a whole. Do you know anything about that, or can you share anything about that? And if not, that's okay.
Yeah, no. So I've also heard similar rumors. I've tried to chase those down. The best from what I can tell is that, yes, this is a overarching union attempt to unionize the video game industry, as it were. However, they are still in their fledgling era of trying to figure out how best to organize and reach people in an effective manner. So I can't give much information at that time because none exist, if any.
Okay, fair. I know it's brand new, so.
Yeah.
Apparently, I did go to their booth during GDC, and I think it is United Video Game Workers under code CWA.
Yes. If you did not see in that slide, the Telecommunications Workers of America, or the CWA, is usually the parent union for a lot of video game unions. That is because trying to find a union that's very specific for a very niche industry is hard, so you go broad. Communication workers include people who communicate over the internet, right? Anyone else have questions?
Yeah, you said if you form a union, you should be pretty much ready to immediately strike to kind of meet your conditions that you want. Is that, and the union funds are taken out of a paycheck, so it doesn't really give a lot of time for the union to amass like striking funds. Is that where like parent unions would come in and pay those for the?
Yes.
Okay.
So it is. I wish there was a general rule. What I have seen is that if you are part of a parent union, you can negotiate with them to say, hey, we think that this company is going to be super aggressive with us. We believe that this strike is going to take more than X amount of time. Would you be willing to give us some union funds to be able to help with this strike? And there can be arrangements where, yes, but the union dues that you eventually win go back into that parent fund before they go into your individual union's funds.
Gotcha.
But that is basically a case-by-case basis.
You negotiate it ahead of time, whatever the terms of it would be.
Yes.
Okay.
Does anyone else have questions?
I get like really anal about like the legal stuff, so I have a couple questions.
Sure.
If you happen to know the answers. Is the union authorization card that people like sign or agree to, is that like legally binding?
So it is a informal representation. It is a symbolic representation saying, I want to be part of a union. The legal binding is when you sign the contract, because that's saying, I am signing as part of this collective unit. But the authorization cards are not legally binding, because if someone says, it goes back to the hard-nosed, soft yeses. If someone's like, maybe, and they'll sign a card, but when the election comes, they don't want to, that card is not telling them, well, you have to vote, or, it's just a vote of support.
Gauging like interest.
Yes, it's gauging interest, and it also helps in ensuring that people are reminded of it, because, if you open your wallet, I see that I have a driver's license. So if you see, oh yeah, I have a union card, and there can be rules around having union cards and what that entitles you to, but that's in contract negotiation. So before a union is actually formed, it is more symbolic than anything. And what was your other one?
Somebody else can go first.
Okay.
Can you form a union outside of a company? Do you have like we have a North Carolina union?
The technical answer to that is yes. The realistic answer to that is no. Because unions operate off what are known as chapters. There are several North Carolina-based chapters for East, West, and Central North Carolina for the CWA, which just shows you how tricky it is to organize unions, because you gotta go to the correct branch of the correct organization. But a union is essentially a group of employees trying to fight for their workers' rights, because if you are part of the same company, that's a little easier. So if you're working on the Starbucks down the road and I'm working at the Starbucks all the way in Raleigh, yes, we could still try to form a union. It might be a little difficult, but we would form a union. But if you're in two different companies like Raven Studios and Epic Games, that's not really going to work, because you're fighting for workplace improvements, and who better to fight for workplace improvements than the actual employees? That's why you usually don't see family members of union workers also in the union. Any other questions? Yes.
Trying to remember what it was.
Give
me a second.
Can we get a copy of your presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe I will share a copy with
Yes.
Janie, who will post it online.
Yes, I will share. If you registered for the event, so this is also your pro tip to please register for the event. If you did not, I will send it out. And we also have a video, however, as you all you may have seen, my technology as usual was not cooperating, so the video may have certain parts unfortunately cropped.